Welcome to Muslims and Mental Health with Sister Heather, a groundbreaking program looking at mental health issues through the biopsychosocial spiritual paradigm.
Welcome to Muslims and Mental Health. Today we're going to be looking over the year of 2015 and we're going to be looking forward to our new episodes in 2016. I'm so happy to have been able to serve you this year and bring to you lots of good information about mental health and how it affects our community, and hopes that we will reduce stigma toward getting mental health and inform clinicians of the Muslim community as well as our Muslims of the Muslim community about different mental health issues. So I'm very happy to bring to you another year, exciting year that we have planned. This last year we looked at many issues surrounding whatever National Awareness Month existed throughout the year, and we'll be highlighting some of those clips at the end of this video. But I also want to point out to you what we're doing in the year to come. So I'm very excited about our new year. We're taking a little bit of a different approach and looking at very salient issues and relevant issues of our time. So we're going to kick off the year looking at setting goals for the new year and how best to go about that, and as well as jumping right into having a discussion with our young people about what it means to be lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender, and how you can talk to your children if your child comes to you to tell you that they identify this way. We're going to continue on with looking at the psychology of Islamophobia, the psychology of refugees, very important topics of our time, as well as the psychology of hate and what does that mean in our community, and both the small psychology of politics. What is that all about? This is very relevant to the times we're living in and will be of good use for both our clinicians and our community. We'll follow in February, looking in African American History Month again at some issues that specifically affect the African American community, but that apply across the board to all communities. So for example, we're going to look at sexuality in the African American community. We're going to look at the state of racism in America. We're going to look at Islam and the Black American, and we're going to look at mental health in the African American community specifically. So I'm very excited about that month of February and the historical significance of the African American Muslim community within our larger, broader society. Then in March, we're going to move on to knowing our bodies, looking at premarital sex talks, talking to our children about their bodies, like how to have that conversation, and then looking at intimacy between couples. What does that look like? How can we make it better? Are you suffering in that area right now? And then in April, we're going to move on to the family. We're particularly going to be taking a look at theory and looking at Minuchin, one of our South American theorists who had a lot to lend to family systems. And we're going to look at what he has to say about the family structure. And then we're going to look at why vacations are important. As you know, that's close to spring break. So what does all that mean? And then why nature is important to our well-being. As we know in a previous episode this year that we did with Salva Chak, we looked at mindfulness and nature. And so we're going to again touch base on why nature is so important. And then we'll be looking at Mary in Islam, and what is her significance and what is the psychology of motherhood. We'll continue on in May with exercise in the mind and looking at the psychology of women in Islam, preparing the heart and mind for Ramadan as we prepare of Ramadan. In June, then, we'll continue on with our Ramadan series as we did last year, and we will have many episodes about Ramadan. So activities for children, purifying the heart in Ramadan, the significance of the last 10 days of Ramadan, and then we'll end with looking at Eid from around the world, around the globe. And so that will take us through the first 6 months of the year. After that, we'll continue on with a lot more episodes that we'll be talking about later on as we celebrate our anniversary in February of Muslims and Mental Health. So I really look forward to seeing you all back, and please spread the word. If you are interested in sponsoring our show, we're always looking for new sponsors, and we'd love to have your feedback, your comments, your concerns. We'd love to hear from you. In fact, we are looking at the possibility of going to a live show here and there throughout the year. So we're open to any ideas you have. Please contact us at nafshealertherapy@gmail.com. That's NAFSHEALER therapy@gmail.com. And please enjoy our clips from this last year. Thank you. Muslim community, as well as the dominant culture, there's a lot of stigma attached to seeking therapy. And for this reason, a lot of people veer away from getting the help that they need. But as you will soon hopefully learn through this series, psychotherapy is a lot more than just Freud. And so when we look at what psychotherapy actually is, therapists apply scientifically validated procedures to help individuals with these issues. And some of the key points that you'll learn in this process today are about how therapists' action between the therapist and the client is to create an environment where a discussion can take place and healing can happen with an internal process being worked upon. What community psychology is, we're looking at values for personal well-being, values for relational well-being, and values for the collective well-being. Community psychologists are concerned with the issues and problems facing disadvantaged people, problems that have deep historical roots. The journeys of disadvantaged people have been ones of pain, suffering, and dislocation, and colonization, oppression, and marginalization. Society has constructed narratives that take the stories of disadvantaged males and females and made them into a people that are, quote, different from you and me. These stories are called dominant cultural narratives. And I'm going to start with, who is your Muslim hero, if you have one, and why?
So I know this will probably seem extremely biased and programmed, but the closest, really my Muslim hero would be Dr. Sherman Jackson. There's great figures in Muslim history that I certainly admire for their intellectual achievements or spiritual levels that they reached and whatnot. But for me to have a hero, it's somebody I need to have shook his hand, or need to have looked her in the face. So it has to be somebody that I've met. And probably, and anybody that will see this will know that, easily the most influential person in my life in the last 25 years has been Dr. Sherman Jackson. And it's because for me, he is the most prophetic human being that I've ever met. Like, for me, he actually embodies a earnest human attempt in a way that's accessible to me, that makes it seem that I actually can have a shot at it, So yeah, he would actually be my Muslim hero.
Okay. And what is your favorite concept in Islam and why?
My favorite concept in Islam is probably, what Imam Shatibi called the maslaha, or, that idea of working towards communal good, that Islam's, broad civilizational goals are to maximize benefit and to minimize detriment. And I find that that's a great maximum that you can live by as a human being, as a group, as a society. So that's probably one of my favorite concepts in Islam.
Okay. And what would you say is your favorite word and why?
My favorite word is probably the word taqwa, because it is such a word that's been mistranslated into English, and it's very elusive, but in its use, particularly in Revelation, that God uses the word taqwa in a number of ways, both as an infinitive, as a concept, but actually more often as an imperative. So it's a concept that can only be realized by actually doing it, which its root is to actually protect oneself, meaning from divine chastisement. So I love it in the fact that it's kind of like Bushido. You know, it's like the Muslim version of like Way of the Samurai. You know, it's like it is this philosophical concept, but at the same time you draw your sword. You know, so it's
So for people that are not familiar with the term taqwa, could you do a more direct translation?
Yeah, I mean, the literal translation of taqwa means to protect. It isn't, it's often translated as fear God or these things, but there's actually other words in Arabic that are much more appropriate to the word fear. But taqwa is really about protecting oneself from the displeasure of God, particularly in the ultimate sense in the hereafter. And therefore, Allah or God talks in the Quran about have taqwa of the fire or have taqwa of a day. So it's not just a concept, but it's used in the imperative mood, meaning that it's actually something that you do. So I, having grown up very influenced by Japanese culture and philosophy as a kid, studied the language, and for me, like taqwa is sort of like the Islamic version of Bushido.
Samurai.
Yes.
I do want to ask you a few fun questions that we do with interviews at the end of them. And one of them is, who is your Muslim hero, if you have one, and why?
Yeah, this question of like who's my Muslim hero is at times I guess you feel uneasy to say someone other than the Prophet, alayhi salatu wasalam. Especially in the African American community where I come from, people, tough people, and so when I was growing up, Umar ibn Khattab was like the favorite Sahabi,
okay.
for the African American community. But the main reason that many of the people considered him to be their hero was because of what they read about Omar. Omar was rough, he was just, and he would let somebody have it, but they're not looking at also the sensitive side of Umar ibn Khattab. I personally do feel as well that if we're talking about from the early Islamic history, that I do personally accept and believe that, for me, Omar is some of my hero, but it's not simply because, he was fair and he was just, and he would go and he would let somebody have it, if they were disrespected the Prophet or something like that. No, but it's also because when you see how he reigned, and his concern for the people, that he went out and checked on the people, the poor, to make sure that they were taken care of and people were not starving to death, and he himself as an individual probably, the books mentioned that he had only maybe 2 or 3 different changes of clothing, as the Khalifa, that he was a humble person, you see. And, and as the Prophet said, well, one hadith is said, rich scholars, of course, they differ about the authenticity of the hadith, but there you can see when you look at his reign, there are many different reasons to respect him. Now, of course, modern day times, without a doubt, my hero is Malcolm. Malcolm is my hero, and I see some of those same characteristics reflected, by Omar and Malcolm. And that's what I think makes me love him and consider him to be my hero.
That's wonderful. It's a nice balance of strength and yet at the same time mercy type.
Yes, right.
Yeah, that's wonderful. So what is your favorite concept in Islam and why?
My favorite concept in Islam, of course, there are many different concepts that are very wonderful, but I think that my favorite concept in Islam would be the concept of well, I'm thinking of a way to characterize it, but I guess the way I would characterize it would be the very freedom to act, the freedom to act, and that freedom being the foundation or the basis for reward and punishment. That is to say that that God will reward me or God will punish me mainly on the basis of my choices, at least what I understand and what I believe. And as opposed to just simply the mistakes that I make, that forgiveness is always, a door always open to God. That we know mercy is an extremely important aspect of the Islamic teachings. Every surah except for Tawbah is preceded by Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Allah's one special name is Ar-Rahman. And so I would say that the issue of forgiveness. And its connection to the will to act and do things and choose good from evil.
Okay, and
Arabic Islamic word I would say would be al-haq, the word haq, And the reason I choose that word is because it has so much meaning wrapped up in it. That the word haq, it translates sometimes as truth, and Allah is al-haq, the truth, the real, the true reality, and haq, the truth is said to be, of course, the main goal of philosophy, that we're seeking the truth. The truth will set you free. Al-haq is it means that, but it also means a right. It can mean a right, but also mean an obligation too. So the word haq, reminds us of the fact that Islam is not just a personal experience, a personal sort of endeavor that is both private and it is public as well. So the idea of rights and responsibilities, obligations is also wrapped up in haq as well. So and then the real, the part of it that means real, what the reality. Allah tells us that Yawm al-Qiyamah, that He's going to tell us the haq of what we did. You see, we'll think we did things sincerely for Allah, but Allah will tell us, that there was a little bit of ostentation there. There's a little bit of that there. So haq, I would say, such a short notice, of the question. It's like I think that that's probably the most important word in my life because it also reminds of justice, reminds of balance, and I think that that's fundamentally what. Like the one verse of the Quran says, He created the heavens and earth bil haq, with truth, you see. And so it's become my favorite word.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's beautiful. And so we're going to turn to those now. And our first one is, who is your Muslim hero, if you have one, and why?
That's an interesting question. I cannot imagine there can be any answer that's not cliched per se. But I would say that there's a poet from 18th, 19th century India. His name is Ghalib. And he's an interesting guy because I'm studying him now, and the reason I would consider him my Muslim hero. But he was very sacrilegious. And I hope it doesn't reflect on my level of devotion, but he talked about his relationship to God, which was very strained in his poetry. And he talked about drinking alcohol in the mosque, for example, and fought off critics through poetry. And then the thing is, he had a lot of critics, and some people even called him a non-Muslim. But the reason I appreciate that conversation that he and his critics had and his relationship to God is that nobody came and hurt him in any physical way. The reason I'm so enamored by that is because for some reason I feel like in the Muslim world, the chaos we see and sometimes this extreme opinions people form and that results in violence is that we have a long history, a cherished history of celebration of aesthetics as a form of communication, but no physical harm. I mean, one had the liberty to do and say things when needed, as long as that person's exploring his relationship. So I find them to be a hero in a sense that he advanced an image of Islam that was a peaceful religion with a civilized discourse, and that all the others around him, religious, semi-religious, secular Muslims at that time, really respected that. That's why I think he's a good person to study for our times.
That's it. I like that. I mean, it highlights a great point about the civilized discourse, as you mentioned, because what a lot of people may not know watching is that historically poetry itself was used like a sword. It was how people battled with each other, and their ability to create poetry was something, amazing. So I'm glad that you gave us that. What is your favorite concept in Islam and why?
That's a very loaded question. I think Islam has so many beautiful concepts. You know what I really cherish, and just because I've been thinking more and more about this lately, is that the way that religion brings people together. There's this concept of ukhuwa, or brotherhood, and it creates a sense of unity of purpose amongst Muslims. And I think the way it brings people together in a communal way is really an incredible idea. I mean, and I think the parallels for which are, I would have to say, are not that prevalent. And the reason I've been thinking more about it is because we're increasingly living in a world that is so highly individualized. And it is. I find in Islam that while there is good amount of emphasis on individualism and your individual responsibility, but it also emphasizes our responsibility to each other. So I think that idea is really, really fascinating.
Mm-hmm. And so what would your favorite word be and why?
Oh, favorite word? I think favorite words change as time goes on. I would have to say that lately I'm really enjoying the word terrible.
Terrible.
Okay. And the only reason that is my 3-year-old starts saying it. So every time we give him something healthy to eat, like salad, the only thing he says is terrible. So that's become my favorite word to listen to these days.
Oh, mashallah, that's great. Okay, well, thank you very much. Who is your hero, if you have one, and why?
My hero really is my mother, and the reason for that is that I have just seen her, from as early as I can remember, which is about 5 years old, struggle in life. And she's been going through hundreds of different difficulties that you can imagine. And but she has come out victoriously, and I have watched her how she did matter. She always used her mind and to figure out solutions to problems, never gave up, is still the same, and she is a wonderful person. So I learn every single day from her. And I think that's my...
That's lovely. I think a lot of people will like that answer. And what is your favorite concept and why?
My favorite concept is sexual dimorphism. The differences between men and women, and how we struggle with that is just amazing. If we understood these cross-section between neurobiology, evolutionary psychology, physiology, psychology, emotional regulation, social roles, and philosophical, spiritual growth, existential aspects, and the psychosocial developmental stages. If we kind of could understand what is happening to us and the struggle we experience simply based on being different as a organism in terms of the way we have been born. Really, that's not in our hands. If I was born as a man, and I couldn't have changed it. So, but it comes with its confining elements. It has a structure to it that I can never change. But that preordains certain things, both success and failure, in a lot of areas of functioning in life. So that's so amazing to me. And unfortunately, because we don't have enough information and how this works, we struggle a lot. And so most of our struggles are in vain. Really, if we understood how this works, this sexual dimorphism works, we would have a lot less painful experience with our partners, with our family, with our neighbors, with people in the world.
Why?
My favorite word? I really never have favored a word, but I think if I think about it now, I would say love is the favorite word. And the reason is that it is so complex that it just defies any explanation. It's so hard to explain it and experience it and convey that message. So it's the most complex, I think, even beyond the word God, if you will. I think love is the most complex and most elusive. It's like so it defies any type of logic and our ability to define it. So I think that's a favorite one.
Well, thank you very much.
Sure.
Who is your Muslim hero, if you have one, and why?
Okay, so growing up, my Muslim hero was actually, and there, it's funny because we're talking about women, but my Muslim heroes were men. Growing up, my Muslim hero was actually the companion of the Prophet Umar, because I felt like I could relate to him so much. He seems more emotional in terms of some of the things, and he's just so genuine the way he expresses certain things. There's a lot of Umar stories, and I love all of them. But more recently in life, actually, my hero has become the companion Abu Bakr. And I think it's because he had a sense of loyalty and devotion to truth that was so based on principle and so based on integrity that it gave him more vision than those around him. So there's the position he took after the prophet's death, and people were mourning, and he was the true inheritor of the prophet's message, because in that moment of pain he could still see straight and say, whoever worships Muhammad, let him know that Muhammad has died, but whoever worships God, let him know that God lives and will never die, of who he was as a supporter of the prophet, peace be upon him. So I love the idea of like principled and visionary loyalty and devotion that I get from his example.
So what is your favorite concept in Islam and why?
After studying Islamic law in Egypt, one of the concepts that I love is that everything in Islam is meant to be a purification and a mercy. Whether you're looking at any kind of legislation, legal rulings, to spiritual advices, to things on character, or just anything that is coming from our faith as something for us to participate in or to abstain from, is a purification and a mercy for us. So I think that this was something I could only appreciate after studying Islamic law. So it's a concept I really love.
Okay. And then lastly, what is your favorite word and why?
This one was hard. It took me a while. It's supercalifragilistic.
You want to say that one again? Supercalifragilistic.
No, it's actually my favorite word. I thought I could pull it off, but I couldn't. It's ihsan.
Oh, you were joking. Okay. I thought you were serious. Okay.
My favorite concept in Islam is ihsan. And this word ihsan it means beauty or perfection, to beautify something or to perfect something. But the Prophet described the process by which we beautify or perfect anything is to worship God as though we see him, and even though we can't see him, knowing that he sees us. So I think this one word really is beautiful, and that it has so many meanings and can apply to every aspect of our lives.
Well, thank you. It has been such a pleasure to have Sheikha Muslima Premal with us today. I feel beauty just having had you here. So I'm very grateful.
Hi, welcome to Adelante. This is Adelante Recovery, and my name is Yvette Kuglin, and I'm part of the staff.
Adelante Recovery Center has helped people in dual diagnosis for 5 years. We accept most PPO insurances and provide luxury accommodations and 24-hour support. To speak with an admissions counselor, call 1-888-242-4450.
A lot of time we don't even know what's wrong with us, and sometimes we need to get away to figure that out. So if you want to go for a little retreat out in Corona Del Mar, which is a confidential location, we're here to help. So we're only a phone call away. Thank you.
In our interviews, we often do fun questions at the end. So I want to ask you a couple of those questions now. Who is your Muslim hero, if you have one, and why?
I have many Muslim heroes, and so that's a difficult one to... So I'm going to touch upon one, and then I'll touch lightly upon another. The first was growing up, my name, Sumaya. She's my namesake is the first martyr in Islam, a woman who was amongst the first to convert to Islam. And she was tortured and she was eventually killed because she did not back down from declaring her faith. And so that was a great example for me of what it meant to stand up for oneself, one's beliefs, one's convictions, no matter what. It was amongst the people that I know, people who are women who are my friends who are advocates and protectors for others in many ways, many men who are doing the same. One of my most recent heroes is the late Dr. Maher Hathout. He was one of the first people that I had told about the sexual harassment and my sexual assault after I had been, all that had happened. And he and his wife and his daughter listened compassionately to me. They believed me, and they did everything that I needed to hear that I had not received from anyone else in that way. And it was so encouraging, and it was so strengthening and so empowering and so healing for me to have had that experience. And that was a great model for me of how I need to be in the community as well. Yeah, and there's many survivors who have come forward, who have talked to me, and who are doing great work that are my mentors and my heroes as well. Because I'm not in this alone, and there's a lot of people to learn from and to be encouraged by. So I need to recognize them, especially because it takes a lot of courage.
Well, I certainly think you live up to your name. What is your favorite concept in Islam and why?
Rahma.
Rahma, yes, Rahma.
Rahma is my favorite concept.
Can you explain the translation of that?
Rahma means compassion, and the root of Rahma is Rahm, the womb. And that is one of the attributes of God. And it is the most common attribute of God mentioned throughout. Only is our Creator merciful, compassionate, gracious, but that we are supposed to embody that as well. And that again, it is a transformational tool of power and agency if one acts through compassion, and that we should be trying to create that womb in our communities that is one of safety, one of protection, that we look after each other, and one of healing in all our spaces. Again, going back to Dr. Hathout, he was the first person to help me recognize the concept that compassion and justice are two sides of the same coin. You can't have justice without compassion, and you can't have compassion without justice.
Okay, and so what is your favorite word and why?
Oh, that was my favorite. That was my favorite concept and my favorite word.
So we got it in all one. I want to first ask you, who is your Muslim hero and why, if you have one?
So yeah, I thought about that question a lot, and I would say that my Muslim hero living is Amina Matthews. She was in the documentary Interrupters, and was for a while, a long time, part of the really important violence prevention organization here in Chicago called Ceasefire. And she's just amazing. She's very fierce, she's fearless, and she's doing some work that's so difficult and challenging, but also so selfless.
Well, she's definitely a role model for all of us, for sure. What is your favorite concept in Islam and why?
I would say for that, it's mercy. My favorite concept has always been mercy. And just, I've always been humbled by, the incredible mercy that God bestows upon his creation. And I always wish for myself to aspire to that, but also those around me, because I feel we're quick to make another person feel bad for something that they've done, and it's really important to remember to be merciful with each other.
And so what is your favorite word and why?
So this was an interesting question for me, because I was wondering what language you were referring to.
Well, you can choose.
Yeah. I would say, if we're talking about Arabic, that's a really quick answer for me. And that's the word sukoon, which I don't even know how you could translate. I don't even think it has a good translation in English. But I think the best translation would be like tranquility. But it's kind of like it's a tranquility that you really can't describe unless you say sukoon, and you know what that means. So I think that's by far my favorite word.
So now to the fun questions. Like, who is your hero if you have one, and why?
My hero is my grandfather. And it's a few reasons for that. Largely because for very personal reasons. My grandfather made sure that the people who he loved knew that he loved them. And I think beyond business and beyond what we do when we work during the day, my life goal is to make sure that the people who I love and care about know that that's the case. He also really set a shining example of what it means to be a neighbor and a member of a community. So after he retired, he would wake up each day at 5 o'clock in the morning to drive his next door neighbor to her job. That's what it means to be a pretty incredible neighbor. You know, he grew his food in his garden and shared it with the community, with the children in the neighborhood. That's what it means to be part of a community and making the world a better place. And beyond that, he was a pretty brilliant engineer who was creative and had an ingenuity for patenting new devices, which I did not seem to inherit whatsoever, but I really admire that about him as well.
Sounds like a lovely person. So, what would you consider your favorite concept and why?
My favorite concept. Well, I'm intrigued. I have a new concept that I'm intrigued by, and that's this idea that inspired people are inspiring. I've noticed that the people who I interact with who are inspired by the work they do are quite inspiring to me and many other people. And whether that's the fellows we get to support, they're inspired by their work and it makes us want to invest in them and others as well. Or it might be national or international leaders on a world stage. The people who really care about what they're doing and are passionate about the cause they're striving to make better are ones who inspire other people. So I'm intrigued by this concept that inspired people are inspiring.
So you might be interested, as with your background in nursing as well. You know, I'm sure you're familiar with mirror neurons, and emotion contagion probably has a lot to do with why inspiring people inspire others, right? Because it's just transferring, it's just mirroring each other and transferring. Yeah.
Right.
So,
maybe you can refer me some more research. I have some more.
Yeah, absolutely.
Study.
Absolutely. So what is your favorite word and why?
Well, lately it's been humility. So I have the privilege of getting to work with people who I think are quite exceptional as human beings and professionals. And I'm really struck by their humility. And it makes me want to be a humble person as well.
Sounds like an awesome experience. I need to transition now, and I want to ask you a few fun questions that we ask all our interviewees.
Okay.
At our interviews. So the first one is, who is your hero, if you have one, and why?
I'd say in the same sense as Martin Buber, I would say the man Jesus Christ. And I'd say, I say that with some caution because of how people might interpret that. But Buber, for example, feasted, nourished himself, read the Gospels on a daily basis, and thought of Jesus as his great brother, big brother, as part of the Jewish faith. And so in a similar way, for me, the focus is not so much, if at all, on what Christians call a Trinitarian doctrine, but on the sense in which individuals in our lives manifest in various forms and degrees goodness. And there's a sense in which, just as I wouldn't, for me, look at Hitler as my idol or hero, there are other people in history who radiate a very different kind of spirit. And so I don't see any conflict between Buddha and Moses and Gandhi, or so many heroes of the faith, so to speak, and Jesus and so forth. I think they all are in various forms and degrees incarnating, manifesting, tangibly revealing something I might call a transcultural spirituality or religion of the heart. And that to me is, insofar as I find any individual who's loving and caring in that way, my heart reaches out to them. Mm. So that would be my hero or heroes.
Uh-huh. And what is your favorite concept and why?
Favorite concept would be love. Love in the sense of goodness, altruistic goodness, compassion. Freud said in a letter to Carl Jung that psychoanalysis is in essence a cure through love. And granting that how Freud viewed love is different than the way other people might, and other people did, love is also the foundation of the founder of modern sociology, Patirim Sorokin. Maslow speaks in the name of love. Viktor Frankl, the founder of logotherapy, considers love the great moving power for human life. Socrates, Plato, love is our great ally. Pretty much any person, I think, that you see historically who has a sense of what life is really all about will appeal to love in the sense of goodness. And to extend that even further, it's interesting that every individual speaks in the name of good faith or faith and goodness. Atheists and believers alike, even if they define it differently. Mm-hmm. So goodness, love, that's my main concept. And why?
And what is your favorite word and why?
Same word, same concept.
Okay, great. In all our interviews, we do a few fun questions.
Oh, myself. I hope I find them fun.
So the first one is, who is your Muslim hero, if you have one, and why?
My Muslim hero, I have many Muslim heroes. Obviously Malcolm X is a Muslim hero of mine. It was actually reading his autobiography when I was in high school. I think maybe even in middle school. It was one of the first books that I read from cover to cover. And I was just absolutely taken by this story of transformation. And also his deep sincerity touched me, because even then I knew you didn't have to know about historiography to know that autobiographical writing is in many instances the least reliable form of historical account. Mm-hmm. If I write an autobiography, it's probably going to begin with how I was the coolest guy in Chicago. You know what I'm saying? It's my story. But there was something about Malcolm X's autobiography that it just seemed very, of course, he was still advocating very strongly for the causes that he felt passionately about, but it seemed very real. Mm-hmm. And he just seemed very genuine as a person. And that is a quality that I've always wanted to emulate. My other, Muslim hero, and this is no lie, I'm not saying this because I'm talking to you, is actually Dr. Sherman Jackson. A person that, I was able to really relate to, at a key and very pivotal time in my life, where I was trying to figure out certain core things about where I was going as a Muslim, and just seeing his example made a lot clear for me. Just not exactly what I want to be, but that there's a lot of room and potential to be myself and be someone that's serious about the study of Islam. Mm-hmm. And, and he was really just doing his thing. But for me, it was liberating to see somebody doing his thing like he was doing his thing. And I needed to see that at that time. You know what? He's doing his thing. I think I'm going to do my thing, man. I'm getting ready to do my thing. You know what I'm saying? And I can still be very rigorous and very devoted. And I saw those qualities reflected in him very, very prominently, along with just a comfortability with who he was and, what he brought to the table as a scholar. And, shout out to Dr. Jackson, man. That meant a lot to me, man. Straight up.
Alhamdulillah. Mm-hmm. So my next question is, what is your favorite concept in Islam and why?
My favorite concept in what?
Your favorite concept in Islam and why?
My favorite concept in Islam. My favorite concept in Islam. Wow. I guess I would have to say ihsan, but that's such a cliche. And I'm sure everybody says ihsan. You know, I should just shock everybody and say like qawamatul rijal ala nisa. You know, what? So men being the maintainers and caretakers of women or something like that. But that would make everybody dislike me. But yeah, ihsan is deeply inspirational for me, because the idea of worshiping Allah as though you can see Allah, it inspires me, because I think if I could see Allah, would I simply just be awe-inspired, like, and just stuck? Or would it actually prompt me to go out and do things in a way that I thought would please him? And I think that the community understands ihsan to be the latter, but we often talk about taqwa and things like that as though it were the former. That I have taqwa, therefore I don't do. I have taqwa, therefore I restrain from. But what about this idea of ihsan, or making beautiful, or worshiping Allah as though you could see him, being an engine to actually make life God-pleasing? And I think that, you know, I struggle with that. And in that way, ihsan, I think, is hugely inspiring for me.
And so lastly, what is your favorite word and why?
My favorite word? Whew. I guess I should say Allah. But actually, I get a lot of, I don't know. It's just in terms of just elocution, just speaking. I really like saying the word Muhammad, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I just, I think Sheikh Hamza Yusuf said once that just saying his name brings a certain kind of tranquility. I experienced that. I just like, I like the word Muhammad. It feels good to me. It has, even the word itself has a certain kind of completeness. And none of my children are named Muhammad. I only have two. I have a boy and a girl, which is kind of like, somebody might pull my card. If I say, one of my favorite words is Muhammad, okay, well, why is your son not named Muhammad? Well, my son's actually named Najashi Malcolm. But I don't know, I really, Muhammad. I would have to say Muhammad is my favorite word. My wife's last name is Muhammad, though. So maybe that gives me some points.
Who your Muslim hero, if you have one, is and why?
That was a good question. I would say probably the companion of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, Salman al-Farisi, or Salman the Persian. I think his story is really interesting because, apart from the vast majority of the Prophet Muhammad's companions, he was almost like a foreigner in a sense that he was a minority, that he came from a different land, and he started off, kind of the Zoroastrian faith, and then he became a Christian. He was really searching for the truth his entire life. He left Zoroastrianism to become a Christian, and then a Christian monk told him, you need to go to Arabia because there's going to be a new prophet there. There's a prophecy of a new prophet that's coming to Arabia. And so he left, where he grew up and his family. He was actually captured on the way and sold into slavery to a Jewish man. And so he really he experienced many different faiths. And he was as a slave in Medina. He was there when the Prophet Muhammad arrived. And the new community of Muslims was blossoming in Medina, and just the story of him becoming Muslim and the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, engaging the entire community to free him from slavery, and his intellect, his sincerity, his search for the truth, his unending his desire for the truth, I think is really beautiful. And how the Prophet, peace be upon him, said, Salman is one of us. He's one of my family members, basically. His story is amazing. He even, during the time when, many tribes around Medina from the Meccans were trying to conquer or take over Medina, it was his idea to build that trench he said, the Persians, they have this idea of a trench that prevents horses from jumping, over, or from running into the city. So his intellect, his prowess, his sincerity, I've always admired, and I loved his story.
That's very interesting. It's one that we haven't heard before, so that's great. And so what is your favorite concept in Islam and why?
I would have to say my favorite concept is the Quranic and the kind of the prophetic concept of repelling evil with good. I talked about that a little bit about some of the campaigns. I think that's often something that's overlooked, and I think it's much more needed in our time, is just the concept of responding to evil with good and forgiving those who have wronged you, and just the power of that. Like one of my favorite, I'm going to say this really quickly, but one of my favorite stories as well from the Prophet Muhammad's life is there's a companion named Amr ibn al-As, who he was the one that he tried to bribe the king of Abyssinia and his bishops from allowing the Muslims to stay there, to seek refuge there. And he was a genius in terms of political strategy. I would say he's kind of like the Karl Rove of Quraysh in a sense, you know what I mean? And after 20 years of being an enemy to the Muslims and even fighting in battles against the Muslims and trying to destroy the Muslim community, he eventually became Muslim, and the Prophet received him with such open arms and forgiveness that he said, later in life, he said, I used to hate to describe for you how the Prophet looked. I couldn't even tell you because I could not even look at him. I couldn't stare at him out of awe of him, after becoming Muslim. And he was one just a couple of years after becoming Muslim who went to the Prophet Muhammad and asked him, who do you love the most of all people on earth? Who do you love the most? Because he thought because the Prophet treated him so well, so beautifully, so kindly, that the Prophet would say, I love you more than anyone else. Mm-hmm. But the Prophet, being, the most truthful person there is, said, I love Aisha more than anyone else, Mm-hmm. Then he said, okay, then who? And then he said, Abu Bakr. And he said, then who? Omar. And he kept going and going. He said, I wish I never asked him that question. But just and this was just after a year or two of being Muslim, after 20 years of being an enemy of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. So I feel like this idea of forgiving those who have wronged you, prayer, and doing good to those who have wronged you, I think that's really what won over all of the people around the Prophet, peace be upon him. And I think that concept is really needed in our times when, often Islam and Muslims, there's a lot of Islamophobia out there. I feel like, if we could go to Pastor Terry Jones, I think his name is, and just, what if Muslims just sent him a bunch of gifts, thousands of gifts on Eid, or you know what I mean? Or people who hate us, if we just won them over, invited them to our homes, and had food with them, or invited them to our mosques, really, kind of kill them with kindness, they say. I feel like that concept is prophetic. It's part of our tradition, and I think we need to emphasize it more.
Mm-hmm. And so, lastly, what is your favorite word and why?
That was a difficult one. I went with a word that I always liked, in the English language. It's the word magnanimous, and it's because I studied, I'm kind of I was kind of a nerd in high school. I took 4 years of Latin. So, it's this word magnanimous comes from magnus meaning great and animus meaning soul. And so literally comes from great soul. And it's really showing kindness and good character to people, even to people who are your rivals or people that, that you may not be friends with, but showing greatness of character to people, even those people that you may not like. And I think I think really, Celebrate Mercy and the Prophet's life in general is all about, magnanimity of character. So I think the word magnanimous has always been a cool word that if you actually look at the usage of the word over the last few decades, it's gone down. People don't use it that much anymore, but I think it's a beautiful word and it has beautiful origins too.
Well, what a great message to, as we get closer to entering the month of Ramadan.
So I don't have one Muslim hero, but I thought of a few. I thought of Sayyidina Khadija, of course, just being a strong Muslim woman, being sort of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ's like number one supporter, but she also had her own career. She had her own life, and she was able to use that to help the Muslim community. So I think about her, and I think about just Muslims who have always championed sort of social justice. Thinking about Malcolm X, and thinking about what he did for the Muslim community. Just the sort of the modern Muslim community, and being a champion for social justice. I mean, there are so many things that are relevant that he said and did to sort of our circumstances today as Muslims in the U.S. and also just Muslims in the world. So I think about him. I think about the Prophet ﷺ's uncle Hamza, who sort of stood by him. He was like his sort of fought for him. He was loyal. So I think about him as well. I guess I don't really have one hero.
Well, those are
there are many stories, many heroes.
That's great. So what is your favorite concept and why?
So my favorite, I think, concept when I think about, I really love the concept in Islam, and it's come up in the Quran several times, but the idea that with every hardship there's ease. I've always liked that concept, because I think that, that people take, or even just the idea that hardship and struggle is a way that God is sort of like rewarding you, that if he makes everything easy for you, that you really don't have any opportunity to sort of struggle and work on things and get better. So I think about that a lot, even in my own research. I like to look at risk and protective factors, and maybe it's because that concept is very important to me, the idea of there's things that we struggle with, but there's things that are easy for us, and that when something hard comes along or struggle comes along, not to think that, that we're not loved, or God doesn't love us, or we won't get through this. But I think that comes a lot, when you think about therapy as well, that the idea is that, you can move beyond that, and that there's, there's ease that's going to come with it. There's that kind of thing. So I really like that concept in Islam.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And what is your favorite word and why?
It's hard to pin down one word, but I think of like justice a lot, and I guess I've been thinking about this a lot lately. But I think I think it's a favorite word for me, because I feel like God is just, and even though we might not see justice in this world, we'll see it in the hereafter. But just justice is so important, that as a as a community, as a worldwide community, that without us always moving towards that goal, this ideal, that we're sort of going to be stuck, and that we should always be working towards that. And it's an ideal, maybe we'll never get there, because God is the only one that's just, but that we should always be working towards that. And I think it shouldn't just be justice for us as a community. I think as sometimes Muslims, we only think about the Muslim community, but we shouldn't do that, because justice is important for everyone, and to think about it again just as part of the greater American community, the greater global community. I'm thinking about that. So that's my cliched answer.
I think it's a great answer. I think it's consistent with what you've shared with us today. Because without compassion and love, you can't have justice. And you talk a lot about those concepts, although you don't mention them directly.